In 2018, a deadly nerve agent was used in a quiet town in England, sending shockwaves through the entire world. What happened next was nothing short of a chilling real-life thriller, full of secrets, international intrigue, and betrayal. But here's the twist. It wasn't just a case of poisoning, it was the beginning of a massive political crisis. The Salisbury Poisonings, a deadly, covert operation that changed everything we thought we knew about espionage and the price of revenge. In this video, we'll take you through the shocking events of the Salisbury Poisonings, exploring the victims, the suspects, and how this seemingly ordinary town became the epicenter of an international diplomatic nightmare. You'll also learn about the controversial truth behind the attack, and how it was all part of a much bigger game. Stay tuned as we dive into a story that was so bizarre, it could have been straight out of a spy novel. In March of 2018, the picturesque town of Salisbury, nestled in southern England, became ground zero for one of the most high-profile poisonings the world had ever seen. Sergei Skripal, a former Russian military intelligence officer turned spy for Britain, was found unconscious on a park bench with his daughter Yulia. Both had been poisoned with a deadly nerve agent, later identified as Novichok, a chemical weapon created by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But this wasn't just a random attack. This was a carefully orchestrated strike, an assassination attempt aimed not just at one man, but at the entire fabric of international relations. Sergei Skripal's story is one of espionage, betrayal, and survival. In the 1990s, he was recruited by MI6, Britain's secret intelligence service, to spy on Russia. For years, he passed on valuable information to the British government, exposing Russia's intelligence secrets. But in 2004, the Russians got wind of his double life. Sergei was arrested by the Russian authorities, tried for treason, and sentenced to 13 years in prison. He was a man marked for death. But in 2010, a dramatic prisoner swap took place, and Sergei Skripal was released in exchange for Russian spies caught in the U.S. After his release, Sergei settled in Salisbury, far from the political turmoil of Russia, hoping for a peaceful life. He thought he was safe, that he could leave his past behind him. Little did he know that his old enemies had long memories, and they weren't about to let him slip away unnoticed. On the fateful day of March 4th, 2018, Sergei and his daughter Yulia were found in a semi-conscious state on a bench near a shopping center in Salisbury. The poison they had ingested was so deadly that it almost killed them both. They were rushed to a nearby hospital, and the authorities quickly began to piece together the evidence. It didn't take long for them to identify the substance used in the attack: Novichok, a chemical weapon developed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This weapon was so potent that just a tiny drop could kill within minutes. It was clear that this wasn't some random act of violence. This was a targeted attack, one that had been meticulously planned. As the investigation unfolded, the world learned more about the nerve agent and the terrifying implications of its use. Novichok wasn't just any poison. It was a weapon designed for warfare. It was illegal under international law, and its use in a civilian setting was a direct violation of global treaties and agreements. This raised a troubling question: who would use such a dangerous and sophisticated weapon in a quiet town like Salisbury? The British government quickly pointed the finger at Russia. The evidence seemed to stack up. Sergei Skripal, once a Russian spy, had been living in the UK for years, and it was widely believed that Moscow had a score to settle with him. The use of Novichok, a chemical weapon tied to Russia, made the connection even clearer. But Russia denied any involvement, calling the accusations absurd and groundless. The world was left to wonder, was this just a tragic coincidence? Or was it a deliberate act of vengeance orchestrated by the Russian state? While the British government launched a full-scale investigation, the poisoning didn't just affect Sergei and Yulia Skripal. It set off a series of events that would shake the political world to its core. Within days of the attack, the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, held a press conference, declaring that Russia was highly likely to be responsible for the poisoning. In response, Britain expelled 23 Russian diplomats and cut off ties with Moscow. The Russian government retaliated, expelling British diplomats and denying any involvement in the attack. Diplomatic relations between the two countries hit an all-time low, and the world watched as tensions between Russia and the UK escalated. But the story didn't end there. As the investigation continued, something even more terrifying emerged. Novichok had not only been used on Sergei and Yulia Skripal, but it had also poisoned 2 other people. On June 30th, 2018, a couple, Don Sturgess and Charlie Rowley, were found in a similar state of unconsciousness in Amesbury, a nearby town. It was quickly determined that they had come into contact with the same Novichok nerve agent that had been used in the Skripal attack. Don Sturgess tragically died, and Charlie Rowley was left fighting for his life. The question now was, how did they come into contact with the poison? Was it just a coincidence? Or was this part of the same plot to silence anyone who might have been involved in the Skripal case? The authorities discovered that Don and Charlie had found a perfume bottle in a field near their home. Unbeknownst to them, the bottle had been used to store the Novichok nerve agent. As they sprayed the substance on themselves, they unknowingly exposed themselves to the poison, resulting in Don's death. The tragedy highlighted just how easily a deadly weapon could slip through the cracks of everyday life and cause irreversible damage. This wasn't a carefully calculated assassination attempt. It was a deadly mistake, a sign of how dangerous and unpredictable the consequences of espionage could be. As the investigation pressed on, the British authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. In 2018, British intelligence agencies identified 2 men, Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, as the prime suspects in the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Both men were reportedly Russian military intelligence officers, and their movements in and around Salisbury were traced by security cameras. The evidence seemed damning, but once again, Russia denied any involvement, claiming that Petrov and Boshirov were simply tourists who had visited Salisbury to see its famous cathedral. But the British government wasn't convinced, and it soon became clear that this was a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored attack.